business today is requests for bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have three different bill introductions. We'll start off with RS 250509, which is on campaign finance limits as far as revising them for future elections. We have a RS 250167, which is changing the Senate confirmation rules on the Treasurer and Attorney General as far as state offices. Excuse me, just kind of running up the stairs. It's okay. And the final one I have here is RS 250050, which is, again, on replacing U.S. senators. I'm reading my notes here, and treasurers, or the state treasurer and assurance commissioner, as far as a procedure to do that. But those are the three that I have.
Are there any objections to requesting introduction of these bills? Okay, seeing none, there'll be requests for introduction. Okay, our next agenda item is a hearing on House Bill 2020. I'm going to go ahead and open the hearing on House Bill 2020, and I'll ask the reviser to give us a quick overview.
Mike Heim with the Reviser Statutes Office, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The gist of the bill is in new section 1. It says the Director of Division of Motor Vehicles shall provide a list of all permanent and temporary driver's license issued to non-citizens quarterly and forward the list to the Secretary of State. The list would include the names, addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, dates of birth, temporary driver's license numbers, and expiration dates, and so forth. The Secretary of State shall compare the list with the voter registration rolls, and there needs to be a couple of technical amendments to the bill. One, the title says monthly. It was drafted originally as a monthly, but it became a quarterly report, so there needs to be an amendment there. I've got a balloon for these amendments. And the other thing is the Secretary of State doesn't delete names from voter registration rolls, so it will read that they'll report to the county election officers the names and have them delete those folks. So if you have questions, I'll try and answer them. The amendment to KSA 8240 deals with licensure, driver's licenses, and so on. There's a conforming amendment to that statute.
Okay, are there any questions for the revisers on House Bill 2020? Representative Simmons.
Thank you. Do we know who has access to this list? Would it become part of the public record, or would other agencies have access?
I'll ask you to wait until we get to the conferees. They'll probably be able to answer that question.
Okay. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Any other questions for the reviser on House Bill 2020?
Should I pass out the proposed amendment or hold off?
You can go ahead and pass it out. Just there's a technical amendment to this. Obviously, we're not working the bill today, so I just want to give everybody maximum time to see it before we do work the bill. So, yeah, please go ahead and hand that out. All right. So we'll begin with proponent testimony. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Tarwater, apologize.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chair. It just kind of came to me. If this bill should pass, is that the only way to remove people from the register, the voting register?
You mean for citizenship? Well, this would be a mechanism. I think that Clay Barker from the Secretary of State's office may hit on some of the other ways that they identify these folks and remove them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Right, so we'll move on to proponent testimony, and I'm going to switch the order up a little bit, if it's okay. Do we have Audrey Perry Martin on WebEx right now? Oh, we don't? Okay. Well, then I won't mix it up. All right, I'd like to welcome Clay Barker from the Secretary of State's office to the committee.
I'm not Clay Barker.
Back to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Clay Barker, General Counsel for the Kansas Secretary of State. And the way the Secretary of State is going to present its testimony today is I'll give an overview, and then Mr. Caskey, I'll pass it off to him, and he will get more into the details of how this list comparison is done. First of all, the Secretary of State is a proponent. We support HB 2020. And essentially what this bill does is it makes a statutory requirement of something that's been going on for about 15 years, and we recently worked with Governor Kelly on this, where the Department of Motor Vehicles would give us a list of people that have a temporary driver's license, and we would compare it to the voter rolls, trying to identify anyone that might be a non-citizen who's on the voter rolls. And just basically what happens at the Department of Motor Vehicles is when you go in for your driver's license for the first time, you must prove lawful presence in the state of Kansas, which means either you show citizenship or immigration status. And if you have immigration status, you go on this temporary or TDL list. And that's often used to also identify people that might get different types of benefits because of their immigration status. These are all legal immigrants, and the TDL list is a database. As was mentioned, we had one minor issue with some of the wording in the statute where it says the Secretary of State deletes. The Secretary of State can't touch the voter registration database. That's only the counties can do that. And the word delete isn't what we normally say, but I'm sure we can fix that. All right, going into our testimony. First of all, as background, since 1918, you must be a U.S. citizen to vote in Kansas. Before that, the Constitution allowed non-citizens to vote. And there are 5 ways currently the state uses to identify any potential non-citizens who are on the voter rolls or to keep them off. First of all is the voter registration form, and I have that a piece on your testimony where I cut and pasted from our voter registration form, where we have the penalty if you lie, and then the 2 questions are, will you be 18 by the next election, and are you a U.S. citizen? We recently added on the large letters. It says, do not complete this form if you've answered yes, because we noticed in the past occasionally a non-citizen would check not a citizen, but then complete the rest of the form because, well, they were told to complete the form. And a clerk would get it at a county and miss that non-citizen had been checked, enter the person on the voter rolls, and suddenly they're there, and they never intended to be there. So that's one method we use. Second is every month we get from the district court a list of people that check non-citizen on their jury summons. But what we found is those people are, I believe in every case or almost every case, they are a U.S. citizen. They were just trying to get out of jury duty. But we follow up with those, or the counties do. It's rare, but it happens. Third is the Secretary of State and a lot of other agencies in Kansas are a member of a federal program called SAVE, where you can send individual information and it will tell you that person's immigration status. And SAVE could not apply to a natural-born citizen. You'd never be on it. It can't apply to someone who's undocumented because you've never been in the system. But this is used, again, to identify someone's status. Have they become a naturalized citizen or not? And we have access to that and can send individuals. Again, we've used the TDL list in the past, though it hasn't been in law. It was always done just with cooperation with the governor's office. And last is no one is prevented, clerk or law enforcement, from investigating if they have reason to believe that someone is a non-citizen. That has to be something more than an odd last name. But if you have reason to believe someone's a non-citizen, you can conduct an investigation and gather more information. Now, to remove someone from the voter rolls, the burden is always on the, once someone's on the voter rolls, the burden is on the state to show that they shouldn't be there. Death certificate shows they're dead. You go through certain hoops to show that somebody's moved. So if someone shows up as a possible non-citizen and we go to the SAVE program and it comes up, the federal rule requires that we have to actually talk to that individual and ask them, are you a citizen? Do you have any proof that shows that the database is wrong or it might be a surprise to them that they're even on the voter rolls, but we have to follow up with that on an individualized basis. And right now, there's about 38,000 people on the temporary driver's license list in Kansas, and Mr. Caskey has gone through the preliminary steps of comparing the two databases, voter rolls and TDL. And when we're doing data comparison, we have a lot of experience from the old cross-check program about you have to be very careful because you may get, some people call them false positives, but two people that look similar, but they're actually different people. And a statistic I use to illustrate this is how large does a group have to be before you have a 50% chance that two have the same birthday? 23 people. So a small group can actually have two people that appear similar, similar names, similar birth date. So we have to make sure we go through a process to only flag people that truly shouldn't be on the voter rolls. And my last point before I turn it over to Mr. Caskey is I was asked this outside, it's not in our testimony, but there is a federal law that says within 90 days of a federal election, you cannot remove voters due to a systematic process, like mailing out and getting responses, but you can remove them for individualized reasons, like death, they request to come off, they're convicted of a crime, and we believe that would probably apply to someone who tells you, I'm not a citizen, I shouldn't be on the voter rolls, they could come off right away. But I'll now turn it over to Mr. Caskey to go through the mechanics of the temporary driver's license comparison process.
In committee, just since we don't have a ton of conferees today, I'm going to try to give everybody their piece, and we'll do questions after every conferee or pair of conferees in this case. So you'll get a chance to question them before we move on to the next proponent. Welcome back to committee, Mr. Caskey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Barker said, our office does have extensive experience in reviewing voter registration records and looking for comparisons. We administered the interstate cross-check program for several years. I've overseen almost half a dozen reviews of TDL lists in previous administrations, and so we do have quite a bit of experience, and I want to touch a little bit about exactly what we do. So when we receive the list from DMV, we are looking for comparisons on first name, last name, full driver's license number, last four social, and date of birth. We are looking for matches on all 5 of those to begin with. Later, we will do subsequent reviews where we will not match on last name or not match on first name, but match on all the others just to make account for any changes in name that happen, because they do happen quite frequently. Once we find a potential match, the first thing we do is look at the current voter registration record and see if there's any additional information in the record about proof of citizenship. As you may recall, we have a proof of citizenship law in the books. We did administer that for several years, and so we do have thousands of records that have information in the system about their citizenship status. So first, we will look at what we already have in our database. If there's no confirmation, the second thing we do is we utilize the SAVE program to verify their citizenship status. We can only do that on a one-off basis for reasons that I cannot explain. DHS will not allow you to do any kind of batch review, so we painstakingly review one record at a time. It's a little labor-intensive, but we do get up to the second verification of their current immigration status. If we receive no confirmation from DHS, at that point, we will reach out directly to the voter and say, hey, do you realize that you are listed as a registered voter and we have information from DMV that you are not a U.S. citizen? And so we will make contact until we hear from the voter, no matter what that takes. If the voter is able to provide us evidence one way or the other, then we'll move on from that. If we receive no verification anywhere, we are going to leave it in pending until we can find additional information. Like, we will not act unless we have confirmation from some other source of their current status. So that's the process that we are going to do. If it is confirmed that the person is not a U.S. citizen, we will direct the county election officer to remove their name from the voter registration list and send a notice to the voter that we have removed them, giving the voter yet another chance to A, understand, and B, let us know if for some reason someone made a mistake. And then lastly, if there is evidence that that person has voted during the period of time and they are not a U.S. citizen, then we will take steps to confirm whether or not they actually voted. We also have a lot of experience in reviewing voter history, and there are lots of instances where on the face of the record, it appears that person voted, but when you dive in, they didn't actually vote. Their vote history was incorrectly updated. It was, when clerks update voter history, they go down the poll book, and you will find times where they got off a line and the wrong person was credited. So we will get actual documentation, and then once we have that, we'll determine what our next steps are. So as Mr. Barker said, there are approximately 38,000 people on the list that we received in December. Of that, there were 202 potential matches. Of that, we have already narrowed that down to 85 that warrant additional investigation, which we are currently doing. And of those, there are 21 that have evidence of vote history, but I want to make clear that number isn't a real number. It will absolutely go lower as we dig farther in. So with that, I'm happy to stand for questions whenever you would like.
How about now? So are there any questions for either Mr. Barker or for Mr. Caskey? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It actually might even be for you. Is this proposed amendment, is this proposed by these gentlemen here, or? Was it?
Mr. Advisor, would you like to take that?
I proposed the amendment because I made mistakes when I drafted the bill, so it's correcting me.
I see. Well, maybe we'll talk about my question later. I'll reserve it it's not for them, so thank you.
Representative Williams. Thank you for wearing your name tag.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so when, because of federal law, when you get your driver's license, you're asked that question, would you like to register to vote? So can you just clarify for us what's required at that time if they check, yes, they would like to register to vote? Do they actually fill out something similar to anyone else that might go and fill it out online or at the courthouse?
Oh, I will do my best to answer that. With the understanding that I do not work for DMV, and so I will give you the Secretary of State's perspective, but I would encourage you to follow up with DMV directly because I'm not their employee. So my understanding is when you do a driver's license transaction, you're required to be offered the opportunity to register to vote if you're a U.S. citizen. So they will ask you, do you want to register? If they say yes, then on their screen, there's a button for them to push, and then the driver's license employee is required to ask 3 additional questions. One is, what is your political party affiliation? 2, have you been previously registered to vote? And if you have been, what is your previous address? Everything else that the applicant's already provided to DMV then populates the information that we need. There's only, like I said, those 3 questions that we don't already get from DMV when someone says yes. So that on an in-person transaction, that's all that takes place. An online transaction, the applicant has to fill out all the questions on a paper voter registration application. It's just like filling out a piece of paper. You have to do the same thing online. It's the in-person where it's only 3 additional questions.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, so then when that populates into your system, you receive that information, can you delineate between what names were uploaded from the driver's license checking the box, or what names were that you received in other locations such as online?
Yes, every single day we get a batch job of records from DMV that are strictly in-person applications. We get a separate batch. They're online applications. So every voter registration record, no matter how we get it, has a source of registration that tells us what category does it come to us from.
And final question, if I may. What's the percentage of voter registrations that come from the DMV versus the online versus they mail it in or do it in person?
I may have to get back to you on that, in part because we combine in-person voter registration transactions with online DMV voter registration transactions. So those 2 together are well over 60%. I just don't have the breakdown between an in-person transaction versus an online transaction through DMV.
And for the committee, I invited the folks from KDOR to come testify today, and they had fully intended to, but the expert on this topic is ill and was not able to be in the committee today. So I will try. I'll work with the committee assistant, and we'll get you the contact information if you want to talk to the person that can answer questions specifically about how it works at the DMV. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Excuse me. A couple of quick questions, just maybe two. On line, well, Mike, I guess this goes to you, but it could be for them as well. It talks about on line 10, I think you explained, Mr. Barker, that the list shall contain the names, addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, dates of birth, temporary driver's license numbers, and expiration dates of such licenses, down to line 12 that I'm reading here. Quick question, is it just the social security numbers? Is there a play in there for temporary tax identification numbers? Should that be included, or EINs, TINs, or is it just SSNs?
From our perspective, it's just last four SSN because the statewide voter registration database just has last four. So although DMV has the full number, we do not. So it doesn't do us any good to have the full thing because we don't have anything to match it against. As far as your question about other types, we're not asking for anything more because this is all our statewide voter registration system currently has. We don't have EIN numbers. We don't have basically Kansas driver's license number, the full number, and last four social are our main key identifiers related to an individual.
May I follow up? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In that regard, when you talk about doing the cross-check piece that you all are adept at, and this is just for my education, and if it's not for you, maybe it's for KLRD, would a good place in here where you see dates of birth, what about dates of death? Do we have Bureau of Vital Statistics, something to that effect that can let us know that someone has passed away versus just the expiration date of a driver's license? Would that be a good cross-reference as well?
So we currently receive a weekly list from the Department of Vital Statistics on everyone who has a death certificate on file within the state of Kansas. We already get that every single week. The reference to the expiration date here is that when you receive a temporary driver's license, your expiration date is different than a U.S. citizen. We get driver's licenses every 6 years. When you're issued a temporary driver's license, it's only good during the time that you are legally here. So their expiration dates are different than everyone else's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate just the impact of the bill as far as trying to cross-check, and as far as this whole question as to non-citizens voting. I did just want to clarify one point, because I had seen it referenced in other, actually multiple articles, as far as the notion of people on voter registration rolls, or not, people on jury duty who said they were not American citizens to get off jury duty. I mean, do you have some actual data on that? I mean, it was, and again, I know it was Mr. Barker, I think, said it, but that is sort of a common cross-check that didn't kind of realize sort of the fact that it's maybe not quite as straightforward as it seems.
So I will look to see what kind of hard data we have. Like I said, we get to check every month. There are very few potential matches that come out of that check. Most of them, the people that say that they're not U.S. citizens on the jury questionnaire are not on the voter registration list. We're well in the upper 90s on that from a percentage standpoint. When we do receive a potential match, almost all of those, when we've looked, we quickly find evidence that they are in fact U.S. citizens. So over the course of 5 to 6 years, I can count on one hand how many times we had to look farther than a quick review to determine that they were already a U.S. citizen. They just didn't tell us that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Ranking Minority Member?
Thank you very much. Thanks for your testimony. It's always good to see you, but I would like to see Clay Barker.
Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and for everything you shared. I'm kind of missing, you mentioned there's 5 ways to verify. Was that 5 ways to verify citizenship? Is that what that was mentioned at the beginning of your testimony?
It was 5 methods we use to either identify a non-citizen or keep non-citizens off.
Okay,
I think I enumerated them in our testimony.
you did. Thank you very much. Now I have a question for, thank you. Okay, so with that, the 5 ways, currently you get the information from the DMV on a batch process daily? Is that what I heard?
For voter registration applications, yes. Every single night, we get a list from DMV of everyone who's applied to register to vote, either in person or online.
Okay, and how would this report be different than what you receive in the batch process? I'm trying to find the need for this report.
Sure. So when I say we get records from DMV, those are people who have applied to register to vote. Either in person, they say yes, or online, they filled out the online voter registration application. This TDL list is a list of people who have told DMV that they are not U.S. citizens, and therefore, A, were not offered the opportunity to register to vote, and B, should never have been. So there is no magic list of non-U.S. citizens that we can look to compare our voter registration list to. But this is a source that we know the person has told the government they are not a U.S. citizen. It's one of the rare pieces of factual, direct evidence of non-U.S. citizens. And so that's why we want the list more often, because it's quite frankly one of the best tools that we have to verify non-U.S. citizens being on our voter registration list.
And 2 more questions, Mr. Chair, and then I'll be done. So you said you want to receive it more often. So are you receiving such a list now, or is this a brand-new list that you're asking to be generated by?
It is not a brand new list. Over the course of 15 years, we have received it maybe half a dozen times. Each time we've had to work through the existing administration, both from the Secretary of State's perspective and the governor's perspective, and also whoever is the head of Department of Revenue. We're just looking to streamline this and kind of take all of it out, because we think it's a really good idea, and we're just trying to make it more functional and more efficient.
Okay. And thank you. And the last question, you gave a bunch of numbers at the end of your testimony. Could you repeat those numbers for us again?
Absolutely.
And I got to put my glasses on and slowly.
So there are approximately 38,000 people who have been issued a temporary driver's license that's active as of December. In our review against the slightly over 2 million registered voters, there were 202 potential matches of someone who has been issued a TDL and is also on the voter registration list. Of that 202, we have already narrowed it down to 85 that warrant additional investigation. So we've already eliminated approximately 120 that are false positives or some other reason. So we have 85 records that we are looking further into. Of those 85, there are 21 records that have vote history attached to that will warrant even more investigation to see if, in fact, A, were they a U.S. citizen, and B, did they cast a vote, and if so, what was their status when they cast a vote?
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Representative Simmons.
Thank you. I suspect you can answer my earlier question. These TDL lists and just generally lists of registered voters, can you talk a little bit about the privacy restrictions on those and perhaps what the federal government has access to regarding those lists?
The federal government has no access to our statewide voter registration system or to the temporary driver's license. Again, I don't work for DMV. I don't know what their rules are. I know what our rules are. The federal government has no access to our system. As far as open records requests, we have a state law that governs what is public record as it relates to voter registration records. Generally speaking, what's on the voter registration application is public record except for 2 things: your full driver's license number and any part of your social security number, meaning last 4, which is all we have. Everything else, name, address, date of birth, political party, phone number, where you live, is public record. As it relates to the temporary driver's license number, it is my belief, which I will have to verify with our general counsel, it's a great question, but that I believe it would not be public record because A, it's not our data, and B, we are using that to look for evidence of potential crimes.
Any other questions for Mr. Caskey or Mr. Barker before I start badgering the witnesses? Representative Berquist, you're off the hook for a few more minutes.
Just about 30 seconds. you probably already answered this, but how can you protect and assure that this information isn't going to be disseminated? If it's collecting daily or regularly on a quarter, it would be on a quarterly basis for the data, how is it prevented from falling into everybody's hands and having just about every bit of information you'd want to have about a person, including their social security number?
Great question. We have been protecting the voter registration information of over 2 million Kansans that include driver's license number and last 4 digits since 2006.
Good job. Thanks.
Since that date to right now, I don't even want to say it out loud, but I believe that we've done an extraordinary job on protecting everyone's privately held information.
We thank you.
All right, any other questions? Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Caskey. I've always enjoyed your presentations, and I've seen you because you obviously take pride in your work, and it seems like your team, I mean, just based on the ratios of how you can whittle down the false positives. But what I'm really concerned about is, okay, you're gone, successful in a different career. We have a new Secretary of State, and so can you ask ensure us that this won't put us into future harms, or is this if we have someone else governing the data?
Hey, thank you for those words. I appreciate it. B, I'm only going to talk about what I can control. And so I am there currently, and I work for Secretary Schwab. And as long as he's there, we will do everything that we are required to do. I am hesitant to commit any future secretary to any policy that's not outlined in law.
All right, I can't wait anymore, so I'm going. A couple questions for you and then for Mr. Barker. So, and I apologize, I'm kind of asking you to answer for the Department of Revenue. If you need to defer to them, feel free to. I'll look down on you for it, but that's okay. So are there any circumstances where someone would apply for a driver's license but not have a social security number? And how would you compare that data that you would get from the DMV?
Great question, and one that I'm not going to answer because from a voter registration perspective, there's no law that requires you to have a social security number. And in fact, the Federal Help America Vote Act passed in 2002 by Congress specifically outlines what happens if a person applies to register to vote and does not have a social security number. So there is a policy on the voter registration side. I do not know the DMV policy on that. So I will respectfully.
So I know next to nothing about it, not nothing about it, but I know next to nothing about it, that if somebody is a legal resident but has not yet gotten a work permit or whatever, whether they're a refugee and have that legal status or whatever, they may not have a social security number, but they will be issued a driver's license. And so should this body and the legislature choose to pass this law, I'd ask you guys to think through rules and regulations wise how you're going to treat that, because that person might accidentally, check I'm not a citizen or check they're a citizen because they got handed the form and fill it out. So I'd ask you to think through that. My next question, please correct me if I'm wrong. There's a separate database or system called Help America Vote Verification for verifying status of voters and are they citizens or are they not. Do you guys use that? In what cases do you use that?
So every state participates in that program through their Division of Motor Vehicles. That is administered by the, it's called AMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle. I don't have that right. That is a requirement born out of HAVA, again, born from 2002. And it requires the Division of Motor Vehicles to verify that the person who applied to register to vote is an actual person. So I don't know all of the criteria. It is not proving that they are a U.S. citizen or not. It is verifying that they are an actual person. And the genesis of that is from the Help America Vote Act, is from an allegation from St. Louis in 2000 that there were people who were registering dogs and other things to vote. And so this verification all it's doing is verifying that, yep, there's a record, yes, that's a person. It's not going any farther than that.
Any other questions before I keep going? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You triggered some for me, and perhaps you can answer, sir, or Mr. Barker. Just thinking through this, could you help us understand if someone were to have a false positive, or for whatever reason, as the chairman was saying, they show up on the list, their name is scrubbed off, they're taken off, is there a mechanism by which they can appeal to be reinstated and have their name added back?
Well, yes. The only way that a person is going to have their name taken off the voter registration list is if we have actual evidence that they're not a U.S. citizen. Merely matching on all the criteria is not going to be enough. It triggers us to find the actual documentation. And because they are here legally and the U.S. government has given them documents and they've had to provide documents to the U.S. government, we will find those documents and we won't act until we actually see what it says. Now, can a mistake still be made? Absolutely. So hypothetically, if a person is removed from the voter registration list because of an error, and they go to vote and they're not on the list, what can they do? Well, in Kansas, every person who shows up at every election and their name is not on the list, they are offered a provisional ballot, no matter what it is, including this. And the purpose of that is to allow election officials to find out what happened between election night and when the county meets to certify the results the next week. So if someone was taken off, they'd be given a provisional ballot, and if they can provide proof of U.S. citizenship, yes, that would be rectified and their name would be reinstated.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. I hope that that's a quick turnaround. And
It has to be.
It has to be. Okay, so you are bound. And then the other question would be, it says from the language that I'm seeing that the county election official is the one that does the removal. Is there a way for the state election official to monitor that? Is there another set of eyes on it, or is it just only at that level?
Absolutely, the Secretary of State's office will monitor that, in part because our office does not touch a voter registration record. Like, we never touch, but we direct counties, and we have the same access to the statewide voter registration list that counties do. Absolutely, we will be watching to see what they do.
So you can see in real time if there's an issue. They make the decision, but they have oversight, yeah?
Yes, in literally in real time.
Oh, in real time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time.
Okay, when you were, as we've talked through this conversation, we keep talking about the issuing of temporary driver's licenses. Is there a circumstance where somebody would not get issued a temporary, they get issued another permanent?
I would defer to DMV on that. I'm going to probably not answer for
this
them.
too. And if somebody renews their driver's license before the expiration of the old one, they never get a temporary, they get a new permanent driver's license. Are you guys getting that data too right now?
Right now, all we're getting is who is currently on the temporary driver's license as of the day that we asked for it.
So as we look at this committee, we might want to look at the language, because there are instances where somebody get reissued a driver's license. But excuse me. Could I start badgering Mr. Barker now?
Please do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So, Mr. Barker, when you were giving your testimony, you said since 1918 it's been illegal to vote as a non-citizen in the state of Kansas. What statute is that?
Mr. Chair, it was the Kansas Constitution. The original Wyandotte Constitution allowed certain non-citizens to vote, specifically then during World War I, that was changed to only citizens.
Okay, was that by court decision, or was that in the Constitution?
That was a constitutional amendment,
Okay, because
1918.
yeah, as I read the Constitution, it says that U.S. citizens 18 or older, registered or residents with certain exceptions, can't be prevented from voting. I don't see anywhere in there where it says you must be a citizen to vote.
And Mr. Chair, I realize the House concurrent resolution for the amendments coming up on Thursday, and I took some language out of the old session laws to present then, just as
Okay,
background.
all right, so we'll stick a pin in it.
You're correct that the current constitutional language is open to interpretation. The caption of the I guess it was in 1917, they voted for it, says only citizens can vote, but that wasn't actually the body of the amendment.
Okay. And then the other question I had, right now, do you guys like exercise a blackout period or anything for removing people from the voter rolls if you identify them for one of these reasons? Or do you, if you've got evidence and they admit it, you take them off?
So, Mr. Chair, the federal statute says you cannot remove someone from the voter rolls within 90 days of a federal election due to a systematic process, like mailing out and getting responses. And the guidance from the Department of Justice is that does not apply to individual issues. Someone dies, someone's convicted of a crime, someone asked to come off. And we believe that a finding that someone is not a citizen would fall into that individual category because we have to follow up with the individual. So they could be removed right up until the close of the registration book.
Okay, and then my final question, unless there's any other questions for anybody else. So there was a big kind of dust up during the 2024 election season about the Virginia law that requires the governor to remove people from the voter rolls that are identified from the as non-citizens. And I'm asking you to comment on Virginia law, so if you need to go back and take a look, please feel free. But how does what we're doing compare to that statute that he's exercising or executing?
Sure. I don't know the detail. Alabama did something similar to what Virginia did, and I don't know if Mr. Caskey knows more. I believe they used a temporary driver's license process also, much larger voter rolls in those states. The numbers were higher. I did notice that Alabama was very cautious and said we found 3,000 possible non-citizens, and the media dropped that word, and suddenly it became 3,000 non-citizens and got the public pretty angry, which is why we have to be cautious on this process. I don't know a lot of the details about Virginia. Do you know any? Okay.
I'd add, if you could do, and I'll work with my team too, if you find anything that kind of clarifies any differences, I'd appreciate it.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any other questions for the conferees before we move on to the next proponent? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you for your patience with us too. Our next proponent is Audrey Perrin Martin, testifying online. Are you there, ma'am?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome to the committee. Yes,
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Proctor. Chairman Proctor and members of the Committee on Elections, I'm Audrey Perry Martin. I'm a visiting fellow from Opportunity Solutions Project, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. We work in more than 40 states across the country with one goal: to help more people achieve the American dream. Thanks for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of HB 2020, which proposes measures, as we've been talking about, to ensure the integrity of voter registration rolls by removing non-citizens from the rolls. You have my written testimony in front of you, so I will not go over it word for word, but I will say that this is a proactive approach to mitigating concerns about the potential for unauthorized voting by facilitating this cross-check with the DMV data. Importantly, it is a quarterly process, so it happens regularly as opposed to just when the Secretary of State requests the information. It also requires the Secretary of State to compare and delete records that are non-citizens, and at the same time notify people who are removed and give them an opportunity to prove that they are citizens and be reinstituted on the voter rolls. This method will preserve the rights of eligible voters while enhancing public confidence in the election process. One of the things that OSP we'd like to do is provide kind of a snapshot of other states and what they do. And in Florida, for example, the Division of Elections collaborates with the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles to identify potential non-citizens on the voter rolls. This includes cross-checking DMV records and notifying individuals for potential reform, very similar to this bill in front of us now. Florida's efforts have resulted in more accurate voter rolls, and increased public trust in elections. In Georgia, the Secretary of State conducts audits using the SAVE system to verify citizenship status of potential non-citizens. And I think we've discussed why the SAVE system isn't ideal, but this process also uses information from the Georgia Department of Driver Services to identify individuals who may be non-citizens according to documents they've previously provided. We've previously mentioned that jury lists often are used in this. At least 9 states check records against jury lists. And several states also specify that voter registrations are canceled upon receipt of any sort of notice from another state or local elections official that the individual has registered outside the jurisdiction, or if there's evidence they're a non-citizen. So this bill is needed because it will provide Kansas with a reliable mechanism to verify voter eligibility while ensuring compliance with federal and state laws. It creates a transparent system through which the integrity of elections is safeguarded without imposing undue burdens on eligible voters. By learning from the success and challenges of other states, Kansas can tailor its approach to meet the unique needs of its communities. I strongly urge this committee to support HB 2020. It's a balanced and thoughtful response. It's a simple bill, only does one thing. It addresses serious concerns about election integrity and aligns with proven practices from other states. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions or provide additional information.
All right, committee, are there any questions for Ms. Martin? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Martin, for being here today, and thank you for your testimony. You made mention that there are other states that cross-check with, or some kind of way they can identify if someone has registered to vote in another state. Do you have any idea where we can find either the tool that they utilize or the process that they use to find out if there's someone who's already registered in another state? I don't know if this a particular bill addresses that. Can you help us understand a little bit, please?
Yes, there's a few different ways that states do this. One of the best ways we've seen is through memorandums of understanding with other states, particularly neighboring states. So a state will work with surrounding states where people are moving back and forth all the time and have a memorandum of understanding between the secretaries of state of those states to share in a very secure fashion, that's always in the statute, the voters who are moving in and out of the state, so that they can help clean up voter rolls in that way. That's one of the most effective methods we've seen. And there have been a few attempts at a national type of database like ERIC, but there have been security and other issues with those databases.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Martin? Ranking minority member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I just want to circle back on page 2, lessons from other states. You quote Florida, and you end the first paragraph with an increased public trust in election, and then you give a footnote for that, and the source seems to be the Florida statute itself. I was wondering if you can give us a more specific source, because that's a very powerful statement there.
Yes, and I apologize for that. I cited the statute in the wrong spot, but I don't have that source on me right now, but I can certainly send it to the committee after this hearing.
I would value that. And then last question, Mr. Chair, building off of what my colleague from Wichita just asked you about is, if I'm wrong, Texas also adopted a similar law about the reporting of DMV. Is that one of your states that you refer to?
I don't refer to it in this testimony, no. But
no,
I do believe, I do believe Texas has done something similar. They also use the jury list as well.
Yeah, and from my research there, they had an incident in 2019. About 95,000 individuals were falsely identified, and I don't know if that popped up on your research. So while you're looking things up, if you could maybe give us a little bit more success stories, and I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, in regards to the Texas committee, I think this bill has some significant differences from what Texas was doing, and the way it's structured. Citizens should not be removed from the rolls in that manner. It's a very targeted bill, and it does one specific thing, and it will just make it more consistent in being able to remove non-citizens from the rolls and identify those individuals.
Ms. Martin, if you're not prepared to do it here, I would, if you are prepared, please keep talking. I would love to hear how this differs from that Texas law.
Yeah, absolutely. I can send the committee that information.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Ms. Martin? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Committee, I'll direct your attention to the written proponent testimony from Becky Arp, Dale Inyart, and Catherine Gonzalez. They're either in front of you or on the S drive or both. Is there anybody else wishing to speak as a proponent on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to neutrals. I have nobody listed to testify in person. Neutral, I'll direct the committee's attention to written testimony from Carrie Sue Vosberg, Brett Anderson, and Missy Levitt. Is there anybody wishing to testify neutral on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to opponents. And the first opponent I have listed is Mr. Davis Hammett. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Proctor and members of the committee. It's nice to be back here. Sorry to miss you all last week. My name is Davis Hammett. I'm the president of Loud Light Civic Action and work on protecting voting rights and advancing voting rights. I've worked in Kansas election policy for about a decade now and got started working to get the state to adopt its first election audits and to adopt paper trails, processes, and standards for voting machines across the state, because a decade ago we didn't have any of that. So with this bill, I first off want to say that the underlying concept we do not oppose. Trying to identify potential issues in the voter file is a good practice, and voter file maintenance is great. How you go about that is where, you know, the sort of devil is in the details. So with this, a couple of my comments that you'll see in my testimony, I believe are already going to be fixed through the reviser's amendment that he mentioned, things like changing the word delete, which is not used in reference to the voter file, to cancel, and things like that. As was discussed by the Secretary of State's office, the sort of most dangerous thing you could do is assume that you can take two lists and perfectly compare them. There are always flaws, and they put, they make funny situations happen. You might recall many years ago, whenever a former Secretary of State talked about how they found dead people voting, and then it turned out it was just, I think, the person's son. And, you know, those things happen. Maybe it's John Smith and John Smith Jr., and they don't add the junior on the voter file, and so it can be easy to think you have a match when you actually do not. The concern with the language of the bill is, you know, this practice is happening right now, and so the idea of this bill is just to officially get it into statute. That officially authorizing that the DMV can send this list to the Secretary of State, we are fine with, as a tool to help narrow in and flag concerns that need to be investigated. There is some more declaratory language in the bill that we have concerns about, particularly how it talks about they shall be deleted from the voter file. As was said, most of the matches that come up are not actually going to be real matches. They're not going to be non-citizens. And so that language, how that gets construed by, you know, the current or future Secretary of State is really concerning, because it appears to say that the legislature is saying if there is a match, they have to be removed from the voter file, which, as you heard in the Secretary of State's testimony, would be a violation of federal law if they were acting with such little evidence on this. The second part of this is it talks about that they would be removed and then they could be re-added if they prove their citizenship. The real question is, what does that mean? What does it mean to prove citizenship? Because particularly in the state of Kansas with the Fish case after documentary proof of citizenship, the state is enjoined by federal courts from demanding certain documents related to registration. So what would this mean? Because as drafted, it appears to take the language of, if we think there's a potential match, we will remove you, and then it's on the citizen to prove that they're actually eligible to vote. And of course, the standard should sort of be the other way, that the state can maybe flag you and try to find evidence and do research, but the state shouldn't be in the business of just removing people from the voter list and then forcing the people to go through the burden of justifying to the state why they're there. The burden should be on the state. And that's overall with a lot of voting policies that will come up, something we deeply believe in, that election security is a burden on the state. It is not a burden on the citizens. You can improve these things without putting up barriers that prevent citizens from engaging in elections. So overall, the simple authorization of this to make sure it's a standard practice, we're fine with. Anything that might seem to direct the Secretary of State's office on specific ways they have to act on this data is of course concerning, and depending on how that played out could raise legal issues. So with that, I am happy to stand for questions. I did want to mention something else that came up in questioning, if I could, which was about for voter roll maintenance, there are a variety of programs like ERIC. Kansas used to facilitate a program called Crosscheck, but Kansas is actually no longer legally allowed to do that because data was mismanaged. And I believe Kansas pays for identity protection services for a variety of people because it was holding data for a lot of states. Again, this is a sort of sensitive topic that I think should be really carefully considered, because on its face, it might seem very simple. Yeah, this list is these people, and you can compare it and remove them. Whenever you really get into the details, there's lots of devils in these details. So I'd encourage the committee to be careful about the exact language it uses, because as we all know, one word can be the difference of a legal or illegal statute.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Hammett? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. He looked at me like, I know this one's coming. Thank you, Mr. Hammett, for being here today. Trust me, it's not all that. I really like the concept that I think you and the Secretary of State's office are both espousing, in that you can't just do a determinative from one single list, that in order to find the needle in the haystack, you do it by adding more hay to identify where the needle is. So while I concur with that, I wanted to, yeah, man, big data.
Big data indeed.
Big data indeed. You made the statement that election security is a burden on the state and not on the
individual citizen.
When you say it's the individual citizen, I think what we're trying to get to here is that individual citizens, by and large, are taking care of that burden by being forthcoming, having integrity, and signing up and registering. But it's the non-citizens that probably aren't, and that's what we're trying to identify. So I would submit to you that the election security is a burden on the state. But when it comes to the individual citizen, there are some issues that we need to address. My question to you, sir, is more along the line. I was looking at some of the neutral written-only testimony that we had here from a couple of folks that I actually know down in Wichita as well. And I don't know if you've read their testimony, but they did bring up some pretty interesting concepts that I would like to see what your thoughts are. The timing of the notifications. If we're talking about the timing, the flash to bang, if you will, from going in and voting, but you are not authorized to because you're not in compliance with the law, be it current law or the past law determinations from the Supreme Court, you run the risk of actually swaying an election the wrong way. How would you redress that? Just let it ride or do something preemptively?
Could you clarify for me what you mean, which notifications? Like,
okay, Mr. Chairman, if that's all right, I'll read a little piece of this. timing of notifications and lack of, yeah, there we are. Another concern is timing of notifications. If DMV provides the list for quarter ending September 30th, the Secretary of State's office may process these notifications just weeks before the general election in early November. So they're looking at what current law states of when the cutoff times are for processing ballots. This raises the questions of whether the voters who are removed close to an election will have enough time to rectify their registration once they're notified that there is the potential that you're not compliant. We will be removing you or scrubbing or investigating, I should say, is what Secretary of State's office said. And once they find further data, then it's the removal process by the county elections official. Do they have enough time to make that happen? If not, this could lead to disenfranchisement, potential legal challenges, which I think is something that you were referring to with the litigious piece. The bill should should ensure timely notification and provide sufficient time for voters to respond before an election.
Thank you for that question. So I think this is where I feel a disconnect between sort of how perhaps the Secretary of State's office explained they plan to administer this bill versus the text as I read the bill, which is that, you know, based on federal law and other standards, it seems the Secretary of State plans to treat this as, you know, this is a list that is flagging issues they need to investigate, right? But the bill itself is saying this is a list that is generating a list of people to be notified that they've been removed. And I think that's where the disconnect comes, because if that were to happen, you know, as was said, if that initial 200 people list, that now more than half of them are no longer even considered targets of, you know, to look at, if they had all been removed, of course, then that would be, you know, over 100 Kansas citizens who, based on this process, would have been disenfranchised under the bill. And so that, I think, is just a disconnect that needs to be sorted out, is knowing clearly what this is doing, because I think the intention is to clearly authorize the Secretary of State to engage in that practice. But if the Secretary of State's office has to sort of interpret and infer and do stuff and be like, you know, when they said this, they meant this, that's where you can get into some trouble, particularly because that will inevitably vary from Secretary of State to Secretary of State. As far as notifications go, though, if you, as a secondary thing, if you were to have a poll worker, for example, allege that you might not be eligible to vote and you cast that provisional ballot, then it would be on the county clerk's office to investigate that, to see, you know, before the county canvas, essentially, they would have to investigate that and find some proof or suspicion that like raises to the level of saying we truly believe you are not a citizen and so cannot count your provisional ballot, or else you'd run into the fact that, again, if you didn't have that evidence, you would be disenfranchising a Kansas citizen potentially.
Any other questions for Mr. Hammett? Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the testimony. And if I'm understanding right, overall, you understand the intent of and it's more in the language, correct? And I'm looking at and I guess this is going to be more of a question for Mike on this, is like, look, and I know that the proposed amendment is something that we've just addressed just for right now, but by adding the word in the second bubble that the county election officer who shall remove such, is that going to impact the home rule law? I mean, because it states that they have to remove it instead of investigate it.
County home rule statute is statutory, and there's a specific exception regarding elections, so this won't impact that. There is a way to massage the language. I came up with this, and I'm more than willing to work with anybody.
I'm not passing any judge. That's helpful information. And it does seem like we've clarified that the county election officer will still verify before removing. Is that, I'm not sure who to ask that question to, but okay. Thank you very much.
May and I think that's kind of at the root, is between the things I've heard is sort of this shall language might be immediately in conflict with federal law on the standards of how to maintain or remove someone from the voter roll.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very good to see Mr. Hammett. Very interesting testimony. You mentioned the Fish Federal Court injunction, and I think you have a very interesting point on that. Does that apply just to state officials, or does that apply to county officials? I mean, what's the breadth of that injunction?
Right now, the status of it, to be honest, I would need to refresh myself on it. I sat through that entire trial, but right now I can't recall all of it. So I am unable to fully right now say what is the extent of the injunction and what documents or individuals or government agencies it would apply to.
And I'd like to interject because I've been very frustrated over the last 2 weeks since we announced we were going to talk about this topic in the committee, that there's a conflation, right? All the stuff that you sat through a decade ago was about requiring proof of citizenship in order to register. And this statute is not about how you register, it's about how we maintain voter rolls. And so I will defer to the many lawyers in this room, but I don't believe that decision would in any way impact this bill that I'm getting left, rights, not up and down, so I'm going to assume that what I'm saying is correct. Go ahead, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you. You answered my question then.
Wow. I can't bill like a lawyer, though, unfortunately. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And going back to something we were speaking to, thank you for being here, first of all. But so the bill as it was originally introduced seemed to have some simple language about how the Secretary of State shall compare the lists, delete the names of non-citizens, and then shall notify any person removed from the voter registration. This amendment actually removes that language, which seems to me that it would be removing the notification to the citizen who was removed. Changes the language to, maybe this is when we will be working the bill, we can talk about that kind of stuff. But
I see exactly what you're talking about now that you say it. When we do work,
citizen still needs to be.
Yeah, I believe this amendment inadvertently removes the fact that you're going to notify the person and just removes the person. So we do need to make sure that there's a notification. I've got some questions, unless there's committee. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Hammett before I wade in? Okay, I don't actually have that much. So I want to try to understand your objection, and because I don't think the concept's terribly controversial. I think the majority of citizens don't want non-citizens voting and would approve of mechanisms to remove non-citizens from the voter roll if they're there. So your concern is that it doesn't say in the statute that you have to verify that the person on the voter roll is the same person that's on the list from the DMV, and you're saying that your objection is that the statute doesn't say that you then have to confirm that they're a non-citizen before you remove them. Is that your objection? So,
kind of. So first off, my objection is that it says you compare these two lists and you remove anyone who's not a citizen, with the sort of assumption that this list is of non-citizens. If we really got into it, so it's sort of like, it makes a demand with the shall, and it doesn't define any of the standards of matching, any of the, what level would it have to rise to be considered, like the confidence level to remove them and say they're not a citizen. And so it's really just talking about this list and removing non-citizens, but it doesn't define really like what does a match mean, what is the level of evidence that the state can say this person is not a citizen, and so we are removing them from the voter roll. It's in some ways too far into the details, and in some ways not far enough. It's making that demand, and that's really the sort of concerning thing, is it's saying that they will act on this list when, it's theoretically possible that they could get this list and they have you know, a variety of people who make a match, but they know not to be citizens. So what, or that they know to be citizens. So what do they do? I'm just a little confused at how logistically this would play out. And I guess really why there's the additional language besides just authorizing and mandating the report to be sent to the Secretary of State for like comparison and investigation or something that.
So Kansas is a real ID state. Do you know what the requirements are for an individual to qualify for a real ID?
Not the exact requirements off the top of my head, but for a real ID, you know, if you provide citizenship document, you get your little gold star. I forgot if that changed. I feel like, I forgot if we're even at the point where it has to fully be implemented. I know we pushed it back almost 20 years or something. Yeah.
The federal government has, but Kansas is issuing real IDs. And so you have to verify that you are who you say you are, and you have to verify that you're legally in the United States. And so if the DMV is collecting documentation, because you have to actually provide the documents. There's a big list. If the DMV is collecting, scanning in, and maintaining documents that show that somebody is a non-citizen of the United States, and they share that list with the Secretary of State's office, what other evidence does the Secretary of State's office then have to recreate before we decide, okay, this person's probably not a citizen and shouldn't be on our voter roll?
So that is, I think, the temporary driver's license list is not a list of non-citizens. From the testimony and my understanding of this, is this list can help to flag people who might not be citizens, but it is not a definitive list of known non-citizens. It is a definitive list of temporary driver's license, which I believe can include citizens in that list.
Well, the bill that we're considering today, and I apologize, committee, for reading here in the committee, but it says the Director of Division of Motor Vehicles shall provide a list of all permanent and temporary driver's license issued to non-citizens quarterly to the I lost my place, quarterly, and forward this list to the Secretary of State. So they're only, in this, according to this bill, they're providing a list of the people that they've issued driver's licenses to, permanent or temporary, that they believe to be non-citizens. So I'll ask again, what additional evidence would the Secretary of State have to collect in order for you to be satisfied that, yes, these people are non-citizens and it's okay to remove them from the rolls?
So I think then there's two questions to that. The first is this list referring to the same list that they just got? Because if it's referring to the current practice of the temporary driver's license number, as the Secretary of State's office has disclosed, already people that they initially flagged, half of them were actually, in fact, citizens. And so I guess that's sort of my disconnect is, you know, how did that happen in this practice if it were so clear and dry that all of these folks were not?
Well, what they get
citizens.
now every month is a list of everybody who's issued a license, and what this bill says is they're going to get a special list quarterly that is only non-citizens who are issued temporary or permanent driver's licenses. And that was determined by the DMV by getting an alien registration card from that person proving that they're in the state or the country legally, for instance. What other evidence do you need that that person's not a citizen?
You would need the evidence showing that that person on that list that is a non-citizen that you might have evidence for. You would need evidence showing that that person that the DMV knows to be not a citizen is in fact that person who registered on the voter roll. And that's the sort of where false positives
And that's the first thing I said. So you have to verify. I'm with you. They have to do some reasonable footwork to confirm that the person that's on this list is the same person that's on the voter. I'm with you there, and I think that there's room to add that language. But the question I'm asking is, what other stuff once they've confirmed they're the same person, what other stuff does the Secretary of State have to go collect besides the alien registration card that the DMV already collected before they can say, yes, this person's not a citizen?
So for this, even that sort of the process of the Secretary of State reaching out to them and everything and doing this investigation is not spelled out within this bill. And so I guess that's my concern here is even the stuff we're talking about to go through verification, that language isn't in this, right? This says you compare the role and you remove people. It does not sort of say you engage in an investigation to determine that this is in fact that person who you had a match for. And then if it is a documented match, then you remove them. That is not here.
I'm sorry, we're like talking past. I just want to get to the place where I think what your concern is just that the person on the list might not be the same person as is on the voter roll. And so if we require the Secretary of State to confirm that, are you satisfied that that person is okay to be removed, since the DMV just got a whole bunch of documents from them proving that they're a non-citizen? Or you just don't want to remove anybody?
Oh, no. I mean, as I said, conceptually, we support this. We support improving the systems for voter roll maintenance. I guess I would just say, for example, and to sort of understand the color of my concern is Kansas, had blocked over 30,000 citizens from voting under the documentary proof of citizenship law that was struck down. And so this is obviously a grave concern of sort of oversimplifying something and not really assessing the details that end up then disenfranchising Kansans. So the exact threshold of evidence, conceptually, I could say that sounds good, but the devil's in the details, looking at the language and seeing what does this really look like, making sure it complies with NBRA and other federal election standards would be really the key point. Like, the big concern with this, though, is just to say it seems to say declaratory, that the state legislature under statute is forcing them to do something without that investigation, proof, evidence step.
And I just want to make clear, you brought it up again, that law that took 30,000 people off the voter rolls was about proof of citizenship before registration, and that was what was struck down. And that put the burden on the voter to have to come in and show documentation. We're putting the burden on the government to investigate and find, and that's a completely different thing, right?
Yes, like again, if there's an investigate, but it's the declaratory language that concerns us.
I understand honorable men can disagree on what level of investigation is enough, but it's the burden's on the state. Representative Penn.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Quick one. I like the question that you asked, Mr. Chairman. What would be the level of detail to rectify? What would be the remedy? Let me ask you this right here. If they conducted said investigation, did all of the different things to find out that this person may be suspect, and did the notification piece as well after they did the investigation, and they send them a card or reach out to them by any of those data points that they have, phone number, email, whatever the case is, and it says on here something to the effect of, this has come up, are you not? And they declare opting in within a certain time frame, responding, yes, I am a citizen, then they go into one pile. Or if they come back and say, no, I'm not a citizen, you are correct. Would that be sufficient, or what do you think of something to that effect?
I am hesitant to comment on the sufficiency of evidence, especially when we're talking about something that could implicate multiple federal laws. This is something that, if you really want to get into those details, it, I think, is a bigger thing than this bill. Like got lots of election bills, over a dozen in the first week, so I haven't had the time to dig into every federal statute related to this. So I don't, those exact standards, I couldn't really tell you right now. It'd probably take quite a bit of research to really think through that and pros and cons. And again, a lot of things that seem sort of very obvious initially, whenever you really dig into them, you find the issues that come up.
All right, committee, are there any burning questions that you just can't get on with your evening if you don't ask Mr. Hammett? Okay, I appreciate your patience and I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate that we're all trying to get at the same thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, committee, I'll also direct your attention to written testimony from Rashanae Hamby from ACLU in opposition. Is there anybody else wishing to speak as an opponent on this bill? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2020. Committee, we've got one other order of business very quickly. The meeting minutes for January 14th and January 16th, which were sent out to everybody. The chair would entertain a motion. Representative Sutton. And got a second from the ranking minority member. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. Okay, committee, one other thing. I would like to introduce my intern, Ira Tiangson, who's going to be with us for the remainder of the session. So welcome to the committee. All right. Committee, is there anything for the good of the order before we adjourn? I'm actually going to have her chair the committee next week. No. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, we are adjourned.